certification of the closed session.
Okay, do I have a second?
A second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
No opposed, motion carries. Good evening, everybody. Good to see everybody. I see that we are apart. Right? Just want to demonstrate that. Are we good, Kristen?
We're good.
We're good.
No interference.
Okay. The first item this evening for our work session is the VSBA delegate and alternate delegate. And what I want to do is, board members, I just kind of want to bring you up to speed on where we were. So in 2019, Kristen was the delegate and Sarah was the alternate. And then in February, on February 3rd, we switched that. Ms. Winford remained the delegate and Ms. Staskell became the alternate delegate. So it's open for discussion, whether you want, anyone's interested in doing it, whether we want to change from what we did in February. Any thoughts?
I'm fine with it.
I'm fine with it as well.
Okay, Ms. Staskell, are you willing to continue to serve?
Yeah, we want to make a motion, to keep it all the same.
Okay, okay. Well, we want to be polite. So first, Ms. Winford, are you willing to keep it the
I
same?
am happy to continue in my role.
Thank you so much. Ms. Staskell, are you okay being the alternate?
I am.
Thank you very much.
It's virtual this year.
Is it?
It is.
Yes, they just decided that at the end of the last week.
So
Yeah.
you don't get little fly swatters that come up to vote?
Yeah. You have to use
Or your
your
clicker.
hand.
Yeah, I made it virtual. They made that decision.
Okay, well, we have that situated, and then the next item is school board meeting dates.
All right, so coming to the screen will be the proposed New Kent School Board dates for 2020, 2021. It really follows the same format that we have this year. We just moved the dates to correspond with the calendar. I'll keep talking. So, Dr. Hart, you mentioned a July work session. We do have a July work session there. Really, the return to learn piece will be a big focus of that, with an idea of bringing a plan to the board for approval, potentially that August 3rd board meeting, depending on how that. We do not return to school until September 8th this year. So it is a later start. So if we brought you a plan on August 3rd, that would still be 6 weeks or 5 weeks, I'm sorry, ahead of school starting. So that is the tentative work plan that we have right now, but that fits into the agenda you have before you. This will come before you later for action. As always, as we did this year, if there are adjustments we need to make, we can't do that. It just requires some more action along the way. But this is the proposed school board dates for next week.
Do we know, just a question, do we know if these align with Board of Supervisors dates?
And I asked that same question because we do find ourselves having meetings on the same nights and we're unable to attend, or I think the one night I spent it over there so I could speak. We have not seen their dates yet. We can, or wants to, we can start with this calendar, and once we have those dates, we can bring you a revised calendar that does not conflict, if that's the board's wishes.
Also, we could provide them our calendar and let them know since we're posting ours first.
Yeah, let's post ours first and they work the hours.
Agreed.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that too, so I mean,
Not like it's gonna happen, but it's.
it'll be board action tonight, and then once we have theirs, we can look at those pieces. Specifically around budget time, to make sure that we're at those meetings and able to advocate.
Normally it's not a problem, but then we get in a different cycle and, you know,
Yes,
we meet on the same days.
that's a good point. We can do that.
Okay. Great. And the next thing we want to talk about is the VSBA policy updates. And I guess one thing I just want to say, everybody here, when we talk about this, their first readings, there's quite a few of them. So we really want to make sure that between now and the next meeting, when we vote, when we get a second reading, that you look over it and see if there are any things, because these are the VSBA recommended policy updates. We almost always, I can't remember, maybe once, we've had something slightly different. So if you want to have changes to it, make sure you do that between first and second reading. Sorry, keep going on.
Actually, that is really my script right there.
Yeah.
Perfect. So what you have before you is wave 1 of the policy updates. There is a wave 2 that will be coming before you in another month or so as we work through these. But these are recommendations through the Virginia School Board Association. So it's directly from each of these changes. Most of them are pretty minor in nature. We have to add a legal reference where there isn't one, or take one off when one is not needed. Just as the laws change, these policies shift as well. So if you have any questions as we move through the month, this will come back to you at the July 13th work session for approval, I do believe. So please feel free to reach out to me or Mila with any questions, and we'll work through this.
Now we're going to. We're going to talk about CSA and outside placements.
Thank you. Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, Ms. Nichols. This is sort of my annual update on our outside placements. And this year, I put a little bit more information on this slide about how students, about least restrictive environment, which is a term that you will hear a lot in special education. And I put the regs in there so that we could maybe have a better understanding of how some of our students end up with a more restrictive environment. I guess the goal initially when we have a student who's eligible for special education is we want to have them in general education because that's the least restrictive environment that you can think of. So that's where we want to start. And actually, that's a parent's right to ask the IEP team to start there. And so over time, a lot of times we'll have students, if you look at the next slide, we'll have students who might require something a little bit more restrictive. So we just don't jump from gen ed to private day. There are a lot of other things in between. We try a lot of different interventions and supports and accommodations before we get to the point where we, before a child is placed in private day from the IEP team. So, for instance, we might put in place a behavior intervention plan. We might look at the child having a mentor. We might look at maybe more special ed services. So we look at a lot of things and try a lot of things before we go to the point where we would want to have a child placed in a private day setting. So I didn't put a slide in here about the funding piece, but once the IEP team recommends placement in a private day school, it goes to the FAP team, which is Family Assessment and Planning Team for the county. And that's a multidisciplinary team that with a lot of different county agencies. And then from there, it goes to the Community Policy and Management Team that I'm a member of that board, and we approve all of these expenditures and things like that. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about how children could end up in a more restrictive setting. It's also important to remember that our goal is always to try to bring the kids back to UCAN schools. I think we've done a great job with that. If you look at the next page, our numbers, our student enrollment in the private day schools has really gone down a lot in the last 5 years. The county is happy about that too because that's less money. And then we also have state funds that supplement what the county gives for these students. And then the summary for 1920, you can see where our students are in terms of grade level and what their disability categories might be. We don't have as many children. We have a really strong autism program at the elementary level, so I think that's probably why we don't have a lot of children with that as a primary disability. But I just kind of wanted to break those out. It's those 3 categories that's where we usually have a lot of our students in private day placements. We don't see a lot of students with specific learning disabilities and things like that. We typically can work with them. I'm gonna skip over the graph, you can read that at another time, but I just wanted to talk about the summary of that graph is on the next page. And so these are our outcome summaries for 1920. We do have a student who returned part-time to us and still part-time at the private day. A lot of times kids can't just transition back from private day to the public school setting without easing them back, like a gradual process. And so we are working with that student. So if you look in the last column on that outcome summary slide where it says returning to private day placement 8. So that leads to the next slide, which talks about sort of where we were at the beginning of the year. So we started the school year with 6 students in private day. We had a child transfer in who was already in a private day placement, and then we placed others within our school division. But I'm real proud of the fact that we are decreasing our numbers of students that need this placement. We're going to start the next school year out with 8 students, and I kind of summarized those students. 2 of our students, we hope will graduate in 2021. We had one just graduate in 2020. And sort of describing the needs of the kids that are coming back. And if you look at those numbers, it's not going to add up to 8. Okay, so it wasn't intended to do that. It was just kind of describing some of the difficulties and the challenges that the children are having. We would hope that some of these 8 students can be transitioned back. And so we'll work towards that as well. I think I mentioned this before, maybe last year, I don't think Mr. Mead obviously wasn't on the board then, but sometimes it's, if the student is really thriving in a private day setting, the parents want the child to stay there for obvious reasons. And so we have to demonstrate that, yes, he's thriving, but this is what you can do. So it's always a discussion and looking at progress. I also want to commend the special ed coordinator in my department, who's the case manager for our private day students, Ms. Nixon. We just don't place our kids in private day and forget about them. I've been to the schools. Ms. Nixon makes a lot of visits to the schools to check on the kids and call in and so on. So just wanted to give the board an update on where we are with our private day placements.
Is Ms. Nixon a transition specialist?
No, she's a special education coordinator, not Pam Nixon, Barry Nixon.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So, do we have someone designated, I thought we had someone designated, maybe that's her, that works with students for their reentry?
Yes, that's Barry. And a lot of that reentry starts with the building level principals.
Mhm.
And then the case manager at the building who's going to be working with the students. For the high school and middle school, it's critical to have the counselors involved because high school is on 4x4. So these children that are coming back on private day, secondary level, that might not be on that. So it's kind of tricky to get them scheduled in the right classes and so on.
How do you think this is an open-ended question, but in terms of students coming back, what kinds of things do we do to help transition them back when we're on 4x4 and it doesn't fit?
Yeah, that's the trickiest piece, especially for math.
Mhm.
I found with the children that are coming back in the 9th grade and they had started with the algebra. We try to get them in a class that's maybe a year-long class if they're weak in math. And a lot of times it depends on when they transition back. So if it's second semester, then, they can start over with the classroom. So a lot of factors kind of come into play with that as well.
And then my last question is really related to the social emotional adjustment. So I see that academic can be challenging. What types of services do we provide for reentry?
Yeah, most of the students that come back, I would say probably 99% of them will have had a behavior intervention plan with our behavior support coordinator before they're placed in private day.
Mhm.
And so that person gets back involved if there are family concerns or mental health concerns. Then Brooke Navin, who is our student support facilitator, gets involved with the students, and of course, the counselors are always involved. And the principals, especially if the student was placed because of significant behavior problems and things, and so they want to make sure that there's been enough progress. And
For them to be able to come.
right, the other thing, I'm sorry, I was gonna say, the other thing we do when they transition back, we still have the private day school communicate in those meetings to kind of help us understand what they did that worked and what didn't work and so on.
Questions, board members?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Return to learn.
Return to learn.
And I'll open up for Dr. Bishop, real quickly. At our last board meeting, we talked about our return to learn plan and what we were working on. Since that time, the governor has come forward with the state's return plan. State guidelines, recover, redesign, and restart is the name of the document. Has been released and is divided with reopening into 3 phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Dr. Bishop's going to go into that. We're currently in phase 2. The good news is the document provides a lot of flexibility and some guidance. The bad news provides a lot of flexibility and some guidance, which means you have 132 school divisions. You could have 132 different approaches to how you come back. And just regionally, you can see that could cause quite a bit of heartburn moving forward. Because our plans will incorporate in-person instruction, if allowed to, we plan to do in-person instruction, we'll be required to submit a health plan. So we do have a series of meetings coming up with the local health department. We want them on board with what we're trying to do as far as mitigation. The county, our custodial provider as the city, and also our legal advisors, Sands Anderson, as we begin to put that together. So Dr. Bishop has been leading this work with us. He's going to kind of review some of the things that we talked about last time, but also give you some new updates and really where we're going from this point. So
Thanks, Bishop. I appreciate it. The book is we have it all printed out. We're all going through that so that we're up to speed on the guidance. So the next, the considerations, we are always looking at equity and making sure that all of our students have a plan that will be for them. We're engaging the community and have plans for that, and doing surveys and focus groups, collaborating with each other, and communication is obviously very important. Professional development will also include those things that we're going to do for the students as well, just making sure that they're aware of the criteria and what's going to happen. And of course, it aligns with our MKCDS. So, phase 2, which we're in phase 2 at this point in time. Dr. Pollack will kind of look at the summer learning in the next couple slides and show kind of flesh out the plan that we have. We're fleshing that out as we speak. Even today, we have some more things that we're putting into place. And then we're going into phase 3 with the hopes to go to phase 3 in September, which would include some virtual instruction. Students aren't going to be in school all 5 days. So that is based on the guidance that would require social distancing. And that social distancing, we would have to stagger our schedules for middle school, high school, and elementary school students, and also those integration strategies. Please interrupt me at any time.
That's what I was going to ask. Would you prefer that we kind of hold our questions to the end,
No.
or kind of make this a discussion?
Working
as we go
session, so
along?
Yeah, because we're work sessions, so feel free because
Absolutely.
this is
Okay.
evolving every day.
Okay, and same for folks that, it's a work session, so staff, administration, if you've got questions or want to add to it, please do. So one of the questions that came up for me, you're not going to be surprised by this, Mr. Nichols, and that is hearing about what universities are doing. They're really looking at their academic year differently. For example, they're anticipating that there could be a resurgence. I'm not even going to say a second wave, because people say, no, we're not out of the first one. But we could see a resurgence of COVID cases in the fall. And so some places are actually having a condensed fall schedule, and they're doing some really unique things at universities. When you guys get together and talk, when you're collaborating, are you kind of throwing it all out on the table there and saying, what could we do? I mean, if we stay like in a traditional school year, could we then put ourselves at more risk in the fall where we don't have classes? I mean, are you guys thinking about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we told every committee, everything's on the table,
Okay,
that there's, this is going to look completely different than anything we've done before, so we need to look at it from every angle and every aspect. So there's not anything that's taboo or considered off the table. Is like,
okay,
if we have to shift calendar, we have to shift time of day, and anything like that. We're starting from scratch, a blank slate, and then build from there.
okay.
Looking at not only the needs of our students, but also the teacher capacity, what they bring to the table, and just really looking at the schedule differently.
Bell times, length of day,
Yeah,
size of class, length of course, you name it, it's on the table. So as we come back, especially at this July work session and then August too, you'll see some of those shifts that will come before you. Right now we have half days in the calendar. That's not something that's gonna be, I would think, let the committee decide that piece, but I don't think we'll have half days in our calendar. It just doesn't make sense in what we're trying to put forward.
Stand days as
So
well.
what does the end of the semester look like? And because the end of our semester is later than the college semester, what a lot of the universities are doing is they're trying to push everything back up before, it's in person before Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
That way, when everybody goes off on vacation and, and the potential for things to ramp back up, everybody's already done all their in-person work. Have we thought about trying to do something like that?
We're looking at that. The curriculum team has really developed some pacing guides and some curriculum maps, which are amazing. And so we're really trying to figure out like where that all leads us. Is it a year-long class? Or are we gonna start looking at how we're gonna implement all that? We also need to think about spiraling our curriculum in September and October when the students return because they miss some things and making sure that we fill in the gaps.
So spiraling means kind of weaving last year and this
Yeah, that's
year?
right. Yep, thank you.
Okay.
And really drilling down to what is essential and what will, on the spiral piece, continue for the year ahead of the course ahead. The other thing that we'll be monitoring throughout the summer are, we got a series of waivers to make this year happen for kids to graduate, for kids not to take tests, and all those. We'll need another series of those waivers to give us that flexibility for instructional hours, seat time, all those different pieces. We anticipate those coming with this, but that will give us some additional schedule flexibility.
so how will we tell when we're thinking about that whole interweaving of what they missed with new information? How will we determine that? I mean, like, what kinds of assessments are you gonna be using, or how are you gonna tell when students miss things?
We've already looked at the curriculum, we've already just said, what did you not teach in that from
Oh,
last
so
13?
he's asking
We
the
actually,
teachers.
we
what
actually,
they teach.
then we're also going to have to do assessments as well.
yeah, we mapped out, we've mapped out what was not covered this year.
Okay.
And so we already know what we're gonna need to weave in
Okay.
that was not covered. And then as they get into the year, doing assessments in the classroom, they'll be able to see what was not retained that was covered
Okay,
and what do we need to feed in there. We've looked at what was not covered and what will be already in the curriculum, or subsumed, whatever in the future. So that we know they're gonna get this again, so we may not need to cover that here. And then what are those things that they need prior to hitting their next level of content, and we're really hitting those hard towards the beginning of the year or as it comes. And a lot of it's, we're trying to interweave it in and we don't want to start September as if it was April 1st of this, or March 14th of this past year. We really want to interweave all those skills in as they are appropriate.
that makes sense.
And Rosenberg, we will give map testing for grades 2 through 8, which gives you a baseline assessment, shows you where the gaps are, and then they'll have one at the end of the year as well. That will be able to show the growth piece too. So there is while we're doing that curriculum work, we also have an assessment for each individual kid to show where they are and what the gaps are.
And that's national norm, so,
Yes.
you know, school closed nationally around March, so we'll
Right.
see how we stack up our kids, you know, with that
And
summer
I
size this week.
It's such an important, I mean, that's a great answer, and it's very comprehensive, because a lot of parents, I've heard parents say, I won't say a lot, but I've heard some parents say, my kid didn't learn anything.
Right.
You know, that quote, didn't learn anything. And I think for us to have additional information about either what wasn't taught, or what was taught and they missed, or maybe wasn't taught well, whatever it is, if we know that we're gonna be able to cover that by looking at all the different ways to cover it, I think it answers that question.
Yeah, we've already looked at the pacing to make sure that we can fit the content that was missed somewhere in the pacing in the future.
Okay.
So anything that they missed, they're going to get.
Okay.
But as I said, it's not going to be as if September 4th to March 14th, and we're starting there to end the year and then start the new year. We've subsumed it in, and we'll be able to make it back up.
One of the
We've
ways,
already paced that out to make sure we can make it back up.
one of the ways that we're anxiously waiting, and probably won't come through to August, is the accreditation waiver, which takes some of the shutting down for testing. We may still have to do testing because that's a federal requirement, but for state accreditation purposes, which gives us additional instructional time in the year, a lot.
Yeah, because isn't one of the things that's on the table right now, whether or not they're going to mandate or reinstitute for the evaluation process, the whole SOL thing, is that still on the table of whether or not they're gonna mandate that or not?
So to take an SOL test, in Virginia, SOL, called other things in a lot of places, but is a federal requirement. So the federal government's saying, we're not gonna waive that, you will have to take the test. What the state is saying is, we're not gonna count that towards your accreditation because of the missed time. They're not saying that yet, but that is kind of the logic, is that they would do that. So it may be a thing that we're taking an SOL test, but it's not gonna count towards the kid or the.
For the end of the year type of situation.
So it may still happen, but it will be to cross, check a box for federal requirements, but not the state component of it. So,
And we'd still get, even if we take it, we'll still get the data back, so we'll get an idea of where our kids are at, which is important. Just won't kind of guess this for accreditation.
So if I were a parent and I were trying to make plans for the coming year, and I always go to the beach in July, should I make my beach reservation, or should I wait and see how the year goes?
so for this July, our plan is.
I mean, next July.
Next July, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this summer's done.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, this summer is our pilot to do protocols and different things like that. There is talk that we will be, Dr. Bishop and I were having this conversation today, that we will be in this for the next 2 school years. So I would be ready, I don't know the answer to that, please hoping we're not, but I would be very flexible with your plans moving forward due to the uncertainty. One of the things that we were sort of asked to do was not to look at this summer because this summer was uncertain. Fortunately, we're going to be on pilots and things, but to look at next summer as an extension to continue to fill gaps and offer courses and different things like that.
Well, and that's what universities are doing too. I mean, they're saying that next summer is considered another semester. It's part of their year. And so in order to get all your coursework done, if you don't get to meet, you can take a summer session and get those courses.
Right.
I would forecast us having a very robust summer session, K-12 next year, pending funding and the different pieces like that.
Okay.
Just due to filling gaps, getting kids caught up or ahead in their coursework. So I can see that model applying.
I think we would agree, though, is that if we start that trend of year-round school because of this, I think we're gonna find is that a lot of districts are gonna say, to prevent this from ever happening again, we're gonna have to start looking at year-round school as a proactive approach for whatever comes down the road. Because if we get used to this for a couple of years, and we find out that students are staying on pace, that they're not getting behind, we don't have potential IEP issues, is that I think that we could potentially be working ourselves into something that some districts are doing, especially what you said with universities. If universities find that there are no more student halls of 250 students. So if that has to be done to accommodate that course all year round, then they're gonna say, well, you can only take it in July.
Well, and I'm not saying that won't happen, but I think it's a big jump when we're right in the middle of trying to look at what our options are and being open. And the reason I asked that question about vacation is because that would be a question I would want to know as a parent. And I wouldn't want to commit and pay a deposit if I knew that there was a possibility that my child might need. We have to look at it differently. But I hear what you're saying. I just think we don't want to frighten people to say, oh, we're going to be moving to
Oh, yeah.
year-long school. Because right now, we're just trying to get through the state requirements and keep everybody safe. And we don't know what that looks like. But again, the sooner I know as a parent what to plan for next summer, a year, 14, 15 months in advance, then the better off I am.
Yeah, I think one of my concerns is, and I know that we're probably all on the same page with this, and I know it's difficult. The thing that I have for parents that are so frustrated, and we vaguely talked about this, is that when we're talking about K through 12, when we're talking about this pandemic, I am just continually still baffled that we are treating K through 12 education at the same level as we all are 60-year-old adults. And we know that statistically K through 12 is the least infected group of this entire pandemic since this thing has happened.
But they also can carry it to other people in their families and in their community. So
I agree with that, but I guess if you look at the statistically throughout the whole United States,
you're talking about something that we don't really have a whole lot of control over, though. That is the governor level of whether we go back to school and whether kids are allowed to be in school or not.
Well, and I guess that's our concern when we go to flexibility, is how flexible are we going to be? I think that's the whole question of, and like you said, Brian, is that our flexibility will look a lot different than what Fairfax's flexibility looks like, or even Henrico County to that degree. And I think that's going to be our challenge as a board, is that how has this affected us as a community, and what are our risk levels as a community and as a county versus someone like Henrico's or like Fairfax's or other districts in terms of our exposure.
Do you know, in many ways, that's exactly like a snow day. Depending on where you live in the state, you may or may not have a snow day, okay? The other part of it is, how much risk are we willing to take? And for everybody who says, thank goodness you closed schools, that was risky, you've got another group of people that say, what is it? You're wimps, you should have stayed open. That wasn't much snow. So I don't know, I mean, in many ways, frankly, I feel like we're in a no-win. But we will do the best we can. You guys are incredible. But we'll do the best we can with what we've got. And we're going to make some mistakes. Let's just hope we don't make very many, and that we err to the side of caution. I hear what you're saying, but err to the side of caution to keep people safe. And if we were wrong, well, then we just don't have sick people.
Part of our plan, and once we get further into the plan, you'll see it is options for families. So if you feel comfortable coming back, we're going to say, here are all the things that we're doing. Here's what's get you feel comfortable. Let's go. If you still don't feel comfortable, here's your full virtual option that we want to keep you as a new family.
Right.
We're going to take care of you. We're going to make sure you progress. And then on the other side, then we all come back. So we want to offer a menu. I wouldn't say it's a menu that has that many items on it, but you're coming in person, and then you have a virtual one as well. And then we'll be prepared if we are shut under governor's order to close again, that we would be able to go all virtual. We did that on the fly. I think the team did a tremendous job of doing it, but we learned a lot of lessons, and we'll be a lot better equipped. One of the things that we talked about is putting Chromebooks in the hands of 3 through 12.
Right.
So now that our upper grade elementary kids will have a Chromebook at home and be able to download and do all those pieces too. So we've learned a lot of lessons. Teachers are a lot more adept at it as well. So we'll be prepared along those different lines. That's why I'd like to bring a plan to you and have you really sign off on that plan and know what risk we are taking. Because inherently there'll be some risks. There are risks every day when you bring 3,300 kids to school. But just to really know what we're getting into and where we feel like pushing and where we can't.
So are you saying basically we're gonna get a local interpretation of that book?
Yes.
Yes.
And we'll get it ahead of time so that when we come to a work session, we can talk about it and be prepared to talk about it.
I would like, so what we won't have by the July 13th work session is how are our protocols working. That starts on the 13th of
Right.
July through our summer programs, but we'll have a couple weeks
Okay.
with it. So by the time we get to the August 3rd meeting, we will have a few weeks of, here's what health screenings look like. Let us show you a video. And you can see, okay, here's how we're gonna have to adjust our timing because we need to screen 500 kids a day, and our employees and our nurses. So, but absolutely, yes.
What about the survey that's been discussed? Where will that fall in this?
So we have a series of opportunities for families to be involved in the process. So we have Dr. Bishop's working, Ms. Mills working on an internet survey to come out. Dr. Bishop's working on a more extensive survey, series of surveys around health precautions, around virtual, around all of those components. So that's kind of our work moving forward. We have a district leadership team meeting tomorrow, and that's our plan is to work backwards from the August 3rd board meeting, the July 13th work session, and we have summer plans and what do we need to do in each week to map those out. We'd also like to provide a forum for families, town hall, Zoom, virtual town hall, come together in smaller groups as well. And what are you worried about? You know, what, throw some things up and go, okay, what does this do? What does it not do? There's a huge daycare question we need to try to help families with, partner with Parks and Rec, partner with the community. Because if we are doing a staggered schedule, and you come Monday and Tuesday, you don't come Wednesday and Thursday, we have families that have obligations. You know, we need to kind of work with families on it. Not saying that's where we're going, but just looking at the different options. The biggest piece that's kind of out of our control, 56% of our employees do not live in Newton. So Henrico has a different plan than we do, and Hanover has a different plan than we do, and WJCC has a different plan than we do. And we have over half our faculty dealing with other factors that are different from the ones we are. That's probably my biggest worry, what's keeping me up at night. So we will work with all those school divisions, Abbott being Region 1, Byron has being Region 1, to kind of work through those kind of pieces and try to come up with some similar type scheduling, if at all possible. Lots of moving pieces.
So nothing really is going to happen academically until phase 2, more or less. Is that correct?
Phase 2, we're doing our summer work.
I mean, other than summer, right.
Yes.
But in terms of the big picture, September, come back to school, it's all hinging on phase 2.
So phase 2, the way phase 2 is laid out, I don't know if I can slide enough. But, so phase 2 is for pre-K3, K3, ESL, so English as second language, and students with disabilities. So for grades 4 through 12, they're not included in phase 2 unless you apply for a variance. We are going to apply for a variance to do some high school work this summer and those pieces. In phase 3, it's all students. So to your point, phase 3 is when we get to the parameter of all kids can come back. That it's not relegated to specific groups of students. What we don't know in phase 3 and what has not been articulated is what is that new large gathering number? So it was 10, now it's 50. There is no designated number publicly, at least, for what phase 3 is. And we haven't talked about transportation and buses and those pieces too.
So, and what we have in our packet is not the same as what is here.
Right, we
I'm trying to find it.
There's one more slide
The
that,
next slide.
I have to
Okay.
add a slide.
Yeah, but stay here for a second. So phase 2, like for example, it doesn't have quite as much depth as phase 3 in terms of information. So we're assuming we're gonna be in phase 3, but we could be in phase 2. Wouldn't it make sense to have more items in phase 2? Like for example, face masks are encouraged but not required. Is that phase 2 or is it face masks?
So all of these are in phase 2 as well.
Okay.
And I'll make that note.
it's just about who can be involved.
Yeah.
It's just it's the who and the number
Got it.
is
Okay.
is the biggest difference.
Okay.
Let's go back
This-
and make sure all of those happen.
So 6 feet is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You need to be 6 feet
Got it.
apart. Face mask and covering is, so, but we can,
All mitigation strategies, everything.
For families and for communications, we can definitely lay that out. We can go across phase 2.
I'm saying it could be confusing.
Yeah.
But these phase 3 parameters, are these coming from that report?
Yes.
They're coming from.
So so phase 3, these parameters are the state mandated parameters. That's where I'm trying to figure out is that what is the recommended and what is the state mandated? Because obviously there's a bit, because the recommended is what our flexibility is, the mandated is what they're gonna hold us accountable to.
Right, phase 3 is more recommended, than, phase 3 is more recommended than phase 2. So
But again, use the word recommended.
Well, it depends on where you are. If you're in Southwest Virginia and you have no COVID cases, then you may decide to forego some things where district has 800.
Well, and I guess that's what I'm asking. Where are we gonna fall in phase 3?
So the governor and the state superintendent both said recommended guidance, flexibility, risk is completely on the school division.
Yeah.
So whatever we do within those is completely, so when I mentioned, we need to work with our health department and work with them on plan, our legal team will work with them on plan because they've been very clear about where the risk falls, even following the recommended guidance, those pieces. So for us, just kind of thinking through sequentially, so if we're looking at the recommendation of 6 feet apart, then we need to work within our buildings and go, okay, what is capacity if we're 6 feet apart in classrooms? And we've done that work. I think we'll share some of that. We have a picture. As a former second grade teacher, it breaks my heart that this would be the picture, but. Okay. So this is one of our middle school classes that Dr. Bishop, Mr. Miller went to today and laid out. The most efficient way to do this is a triangular method. I'm sure Sarah's been doing this work as well, can speak to it. But this is a classroom that would typically house 24, 25.
Yeah.
So at 6 feet apart, it takes us to 9. So, and that's kind of what it would have to.
those are 7 feet apart in order to achieve 6 feet social distancing.
So what about, so that brings me to, what about, instead of it saying, okay, so this is math class, or this is whatever class, what about using the cafeteria and the hallways and the?
So we are looking at common places and, especially if we can't use the cafeteria for lunch. And so then we would be, we are looking at those spaces, like at the middle school, there's the upstairs, windowed space. We are looking at those auxiliary spaces as what can we do for classrooms. And like today, when we set this up, we brought in Mr. Wheeler, our assistant principal at the middle school, and began thinking through, if this were a reality, what would this do to our schedule? What would this do to our spacing and PE and things like that? And started talking through some of those items to see what could we do in a building where this is the reality.
So can I ask another question? And again, I apologize, I'm just trying to understand the breadth of flexibility. So let's say this is Mr. Wheeler's class, and it normally has 20-some kids in it, you can only have 10. What's the possibility of him having 10 more in the atrium area with parapro and a camera? I mean, and a video, and I'm just saying, are you guys looking at that? I mean, when you think about all the options, you really are thinking about all the options. Do you know what I'm saying? So they're still physically in the building, they could even, but, and, I mean.
We are, I would say like a scenario like that, we don't have that many of those spaces to do very many classes. I mean, so you'd be looking at 2 or 3 classes like a game.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And you're looking at transition time, and do the students stay in the classroom, do teachers come into those classrooms, or, how long does it take to to move from one class to another? So that's really the.
What about using other buildings? Churches.
That has been brainstormed as an option to look at those pieces as well. Last week's task was Dr. Bishop led the work about partnering with Mosley Architects, so we have capacity looks at all of our buildings.
Okay.
You can kind of see where they are. We can make these available to you as well. These are not all.
So are you basically coming up with being able, about half of the kids you're looking at
about. So, under these guidelines with some very creative scheduling and maximizing spaces, especially middle and high school, to be able to about half.
But would we be way off, and I know I'm being a rebel here, but is that if it just doesn't become logical because of our configuration, just because we don't have that many classrooms, that what is our risk assessment if now we're at 4 feet versus 6 feet?
But I think that's a conversation with the health department and looking
Right.
at, once we line up, here's what we're gonna do. To just brainstorm wise, one of the conversation points is there will be a virtual day for all the students. And that would be a mass cleaning day that we partner with SSC and they would do detailed once a week. So if we have that in place and we're doing these health screenings and we have removed the touch points in the, so if we take out water fountains and do all the, if we have all these in place, we're lowering the risk and perhaps we're able to do some different things. But it's really a combination of all those pieces, and then ultimately it's where we feel as a group that, you know, we're comfortable and we feel ready to roll with it. So it's pretty complex to get to that point. We want to arm you with all the information and do all the legwork around the research for configurations, capacity, health and safety, and just to keep in mind, we trimmed about $1.4 million from the budget. We've offset another $500,000 in sales tax for next year. All of this costs money.
Mhm.
So to do these changes, to make it safer, to do additional cleanings, to do additional, so we have to be, not to put another cloud in there, but there's a fiscal component to all of this. There could be a staffing.
Well, I mean, honestly, I know everybody is conscious, but that is how frustrating it is for there to be bailouts and for education to bear the brunt of all of the children across the country and essentially not have anywhere remotely the same bailout.
Yeah.
It's
To
just
do it for
incredible.
us. So we have $217,000 that we have to,
$217,000 for how many children?
for 3,300 kids.
3,300
Do the
kids.
math per kid. That's gonna help us with the mitigation. So,
Thank you, sorry, didn't mean that.
but we're being very creative financially, very creative personnel, and doing everything possible.
And to speak to the classroom density issue, I mean, everybody has that same issue. So it's not just
Yeah, I guess that's the whole
density.
issue, because you only have X amount of classrooms,
Right,
X
and
amount of
they
square
are,
footage. So you,
the
I mean,
square foot all
we can't
the
make up more classrooms. And so, i.e., back to your point, Gail, is that where are we gonna put them? But it doesn't, I mean, in the teacher's defense, if they're used to using, you know, their whiteboard and all that kind of stuff every single class, and now you say, now you gotta go from this class to that class, and now you gotta use somebody else's whiteboard, and you gotta take your laptop with you to get the same curriculum. If teachers have to move and students have to stay, that's a whole nother component, because teachers are moving and students are staying still.
And is that even possible, and especially at the high school where not everybody's taking the same?
It's not possible at the middle or high school.
Yeah, that's, I
It's
mean,
going, it's only possible at elementary school where the movement is going well anyway, and you just bring in the music teacher for the day or what have you.
So, and the other question is really something that's a little, well, you still have to think about it, and that's building in the ability to be nimble. So let's say, using this idea that you're 6 feet apart, and I don't know, you know, that the analytics, we don't have the benefit of having somebody come in, run all the numbers and say, well, your odds are, because your community's low, and, you know, your touch points are this or that. But what if, and what, do you lock into a particular mode, or do you say, and if these things happen, we're gonna shift this way, we're gonna shift that way. We already know if things get worse, we're gonna go to virtual learning. But what if things stay better? What would we do? Would we go to 4 feet? Would we, I mean, are we prepared to flow in both directions?
yeah, that's a great
We're
point.
looking at this as a semester plan.
Okay,
We do think it'll carry for the year based on what we're seeing right now.
okay,
But this would be a plan, we would lock it up for a semester, so families would know the consistency. For us in grading, so if you were virtual, we'd like you to be virtual for a semester before you come back So we cut that and then you could move in, but to that point, on the optimistic side, yeah, absolutely.
Can you imagine, you started with 12 kids, the teacher's like, this is awesome. And then 8 weeks later, you had 12 more. And you're like, oh my gosh.
Where are the other 12? Are they at home?
Well,
They're
Are they,
yeah, I mean, that's the
are they
whole
learning
thing.
Yeah,
what's going on in the classroom?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we've been moving over the last 5 years with our one-to-one towards blended learning. And that's going to accelerate very quickly over the next 2 months, basically. That where if children are sitting at home, yeah, they're still receiving some sort of content. Mr. Nichols talked about moving the one-to-one down to 3 through 12. And we've even talked with the K-1-2 teachers about the feasibility of students also at K-1-2 being able to have devices and what would that look like? How have their kids over the last year or two done in the classroom with it? And so that if we need to go to that route of having virtual days throughout the week, then we can do that. And we're working with teachers in developing professional development, IHRTs. We're working through some professional development right now on how do we get teachers thinking in that mode to where they're planning lessons that can be content in the classroom, practice at home, or practice in the classroom content at home and pivot there as they need to. So that, I mean, that's one of the benefits of having been a one-to-one for a number of years. So now we can start to make those shifts as we need to.
In talking to teachers, mainly at the high school, because we lived there last week, to a person, they're like, if I can just see my kids for a couple of days, I can do the pieces only I can do, but then there are pieces that they can do. So if I can go back and forth like that, that's a much better solution.
And the students are accountable too, so they're coming back to school, they're getting reinforcement and assessment on the learning, so they're.
What about students that struggle with, and there will be students who will be more nimble themselves. They'll be adaptable and they'll be able to kind of go, get some face-to-face and then some online learning. What about students that really struggle with the online learning piece? I mean, are we gonna build in some extra support for them? Is that something parapros? I don't know. What are we thinking about kids that we learn very quickly, they struggle with it?
And we've had the question come up, so, those kids that are at home, half that are at home, they're working on something, they like some sort of practice or something, and they run into a roadblock, and like, I just can't figure this out. What happened? And we brainstormed some uses of the parapros or some type of office hour for teachers, because I mean, they're still gonna have kids in the classroom.
Right.
But what could they do, or what could we do to provide some support to those? We are considering that,
Okay.
and how can we do that? And looking at a variety, and we're looking at a variety of different staff positions, and how do they get reworked in this to keep them on the job and also fix some of those concerns.
Okay.
We could have some virtual teachers that would serve that purpose.
Right.
Virtual
There would
on
be
the
people who are
remediation.
really good at virtual learning, really committed to being the best at that, who could work with students who are struggling.
And we talked about, I mean, there's nothing we have to talk about, I don't think, but we talked about, the possibility of Saturdays and different small.
Could you unite school as well?
I think at this point, anything's possible. It would just be finding staff that's the
I
schedule.
mean, when you talk about some teachers are here some of the days, they're not here the other days, you talk about daycare. That would be one of the options for some teachers who live in another jurisdiction to say, hey, I have to have, my schedule doesn't blend, so I'm in daycare Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But then could they possibly say, hey, but I can work from 6 to 9 and do night classes if that is, if that's a potential option, back to your point, how do you accommodate all the different districts and what they're going to do?
And one of our main constraints right now is we have the current workforce that we have, and we have the current budget for that. So can we distribute that personnel?
Yeah.
And still balance out. That's going to be probably one of the biggest challenges with a lot of uncertainties. We did get some good news that June sales tax, so running 2 months behind was a month that we were kind of shut down, or better than anticipated. So let's hope that trend continues. So we don't have that as a big cloud hanging over our head next year too.
Related to that, I guess, is lobbying efforts, on the part of the state and the county on broadband for rural communities? I mean, are we just kind of like laying low and just kind of?
The governor,
Or?
the governor announced, I think $64 million for technology initiatives, which was exciting at first, but when you pull it back, it's more about Wi-Fi hotspots, and it's not the hard work that really needs to be done in a rural community. So that's what we're pushing for and campaign for. Mr. Hathaway and I meet Wednesday to continue that conversation. That's the conversation he and I keep having. When we did our CARES Act proposals over there last Friday, a lot of ours was trying to close the internet gap at home for families with our Wi-Fi buses and our Wi-Fi hotspots and even our USB drives. We're trying every strategy we can to pull that off. That's really the work that needs to be done and advocate for. The rural communities are pulling together to do that because it's a huge issue in the mountains, it's a huge issue in Southwest, it's a huge issue here. But how far that's going, I don't. Exactly.
I think one of the things that's important to say to all of you as you're working on trying to make education for children happen is that county administrators, state folks, school boards, I mean, one of the things we can do is really try to lobby for increased services for rural communities, and I think that's something that really ought to be at the forefront of what we do, you know? I mean, we're trusting you guys to do this job, but there's some things we could try to push as well, because it's absurd.
Every Tuesday and Thursday, Dr. Harder mentioned this to me at one point, every Tuesday and Thursday, we have a call with the state superintendent and all the other superintendents in the state. So this isn't something we're doing in isolation. We have a lot of touch points with the BDOE and other school divisions. We have a Region 1 meeting this week as well. So we're all figuring this out together and trying to put those pieces together. So we'll keep you updated on other localities as well and share those notes with you.
We asked lots of questions and made a lot of comments.
We can go through these considerations, but I mean, these are just really kind of things that we've already talked about, you know, since the school year, working with Parks and Rec, things that we're doing this summer, for the high, middle, elementary.
Yeah, we touched on a lot of these.
Just scheduling, you know, all these things, these are all things that we've touched on. So, again, we're here if you have any other questions about any of these considerations as we.
What are the guidance counselors doing right now with building schedules in the fall?
Well, we are still working on that. We're working on the students at the high school level. We need to make sure that they have those credits. And so we're working on making sure we're putting supports and opportunities for those students as well, so that we can schedule them in. We're kind of at the high school level, we're going, okay, let's pretend like all these students are going on to the next thing without needing all that support. So we're gonna go ahead and create a schedule. Middle school, we're really going out with the schedule for everything. Just looking what the students' needs are. That's where we are with scheduling. The counseling part is, we're gonna work with those counselors.
Real quick, unintended consequences of food service, you're gonna hear a lot about just take the food to the classroom so they don't have to move. It increases costs exponentially. So now your cafeteria employees are doing the food, putting it together, and now delivering it all over the high school or working with, because we have to minimize the movement of everybody else, so really they do the ones too. That's not a great option, and then keeping a kid in the classroom all day is really not a great option. It's just not developmental
That kind of takes us into social emotional learning. I mean, certainly from a developmental standpoint, I mean, all kids, all students need to move at some point, but developmentally, the younger ones particularly need to move. I mean, is that something that's gonna be built in? So, I mean, get them outside, have them where distance is expected.
We've discussed that with the school today. Yeah.
So that's one of the things when you talk about where we'll push as far as a guideline, one of the things we'll push on is mitigate risk, but looking at where we can move safely. Just
The middle school, we're not gonna go to the locker room to change. We're gonna try to figure out how we're gonna and encourage different activities throughout the school year.
That'll probably be the most popular thing to do in those schools. Those schools
You don't have to dress
not
up.
having to dress out, maybe,
Yes.
that may be the big win of this plan, but,
So when you get to, and this is really on your social emotional slide, the question is, will there be overlap between, or what will overlap look like when we talk about addressing the social emotional needs? I mean, you know, those are all legitimate sentences that have meaning, but what's it gonna look like in your account? We don't have to answer that right now, but that question's gonna come up again. So, you know, what does trauma-informed practice look like? What's our outreach to families, and so where are we overlapping with staff? You know, like everybody, for example, positive school climate for students and staff, well, that applies to everybody. But the people who are less involved with the kids, how are they gonna be involved with it? You know, it's something that I think can fall behind the wayside as we focus on academics.
I mean, you know, as I was looking at this list, I think the bottom line is, no matter what we do in September, after week 2, the parents are gonna tell you how it's going. I mean, it doesn't matter what we say. It doesn't matter what we do. The parents are gonna tell you how it's going. And so really in their defense, that's the ultimate feedback that we need, because they're gonna let you know, because their kids are gonna come home and their kids are gonna say, I don't know if I can do this. Or some parents may say, I really like this. Or the kids are gonna say, why can't we go outside and play today? I don't understand. You know, why can't I talk to my friends today? You know, I haven't seen them in 2 weeks.
But that's part of our responsibility to be partners with parents.
Right.
We're not asking for parents and kids to gang up on the school and say, why aren't we doing X, Y, Z? What we're saying to parents is work with us during these challenging times to be as creative as possible. And so I hear what you're saying, but I'm a parent of 2 kids and adults, and everything they said wasn't always the way it was.
No.
So, I mean, as a parent, you've got to also go to the adults and say, to the teachers and administrators, and say, what gives? What's going on? You know, what's happening?
Well, and I think
We're
that,
gonna get in trouble with, you know,
Yeah,
we can't make everybody happy.
and that's the thing that we're gonna see that we don't have. I think it's gonna make it even that much more challenging, because we have to, and I can't, it's hard to visualize this, but you have parents that have a bunch of built up emotions since the end of March of what they think school should be. So they're processing all this stuff from March all the way through September. And they're like, well, this is not what I thought it was gonna look like. Now, back to your surveys, I'm hoping that more and more parents will fill those out to really give us positive feedback. So as you develop things, you're like, this is what you wanted.
and we push it out, we only get 30%.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and then at least if you push it out, you say, we gave you the opportunity, you get a response, our hands are tied, we got to make a decision.
Well, that's why we also, like Mr. Nichols talked about, we want multiple avenues there. We want to have some forums and some town halls, so that those that, and hopefully it's not the same parents at the town halls at the forums and it's all right. It might will be, but hopefully we get a variety there and get enough feedback to where we get a good sampling of what everybody's looking on.
And we get a couple, just off the top of my head, but we get a couple 100, 300 families every Monday at graduate. I mean, that's a group that we can, you know, another group in addition to other places. And we talk to them about main things already.
Yeah.
So we can add that to it.
We're also partnering with Panorama, which has a great questions for distance learning, for social emotional learning, it also has parents and family and student feedback. Really easy way to really capture information and assess where the students are. So we're going to work through that.
Panorama makes a living being experts in surveying certain questions that they know that's behind it and so forth. So we brought in some assistance on that. This will likely be a topic in every meeting we have moving forward, just as we continue to update you.
Any other questions at this point? Andrea, any questions? Are you still there?
None from me.
We are going to move in right now to the student handbook code of conduct. Dr. Bishop, you are on again.
This is the second reading of the student handbook, and of course, with the new policies that are in place, Ms. Hall was very helpful to make sure that all of these things were considered when we're looking at the handbook. As soon as these the policies are adopted, then we'll make sure that those are incorporated into the handbook with the new guidance, and actually some things that will be taken out of policy. So this is the second reading of the student handbook. A concern from last was just making sure that we are building consistency into our practices at the schools. So we are working towards more training and more looking at the handbook and really having a good discourse with our administrators as we really implement better school culture and continue to improve that. So this is the student handbook. Any questions?
Board members, questions?
I didn't finish doing what I wanted to do last time. I wanted to look at the the appeal process.
Well, that was the only question I had was that this policy describes the student,
Does do this the short-term suspension appeal process.
so if we were to back up and in extreme situations, they needed to come before the board, would we have to alter this plan?
In terms of the long-term suspensions, is that the appeal process or the hearing process?
Hearing process.
The hearing process. If there's a hearing, if there's hearings that you would need to, want to, that would just be something that, you would bring to me, and I would have them, that if there's specific things that you wanted to hear in terms of if there's a long-term suspension, a recommendation for a long-term suspension, then we could,
So we could approve the plan and still go back and talk together about what,
If there's a certain specific category or offense or offenses or those pieces
right,
in a long-term bucket that you,
right,
we can communicate that to you, and you can decide whether you would like to have a hearing on that. That is, but it wouldn't be for short-term suspensions, it would just be the long-term pieces.
and that's really, we were always, it wasn't short-term suspension,
Right.
suspension.
Yeah, you would.
We were involved in long-term suspension.
until those long-term suspensions would come to me first, and then they would go
Right.
to you, as a first hearing for me, and then would be recommended to the school board for a hearing.
And just on list of interesting things we're tackling as we develop a new plan, if we are on a staggered schedule, one of the things we talked about today, if you do happen to get suspended, what are those suspension days if you're not in school on Thursday, Friday, let's say, or.
If you're doing virtual school, do you get zeros?
Right, you do virtually, so just looking through all of those pieces, so no, that would prevent us from moving that.
Do we have a provision in the handbook, and I think we basically talked about this, that we have to add something to the effect based on the current thing, that we have the flexibility to either adjust or adopt new policies or new procedures based on what you just said? Do we have that flexibility? Because if we have to go to staggered schedules and students are only at school half the time, how do we have the flexibility to adopt or adjust the policy based on that sort of flexibility?
We would be able to come back and amend it.
Okay.
At any point, this is the overall approval.
Okay.
If there was something that rose to the level, a lot of things we can do outside the code of conduct and work with the board.
Okay.
If it needs to be official, we can do that as well.
Yeah, so I can't find it now, but what my concern was the ability for the student to have additional information introduced into the facts after the initial findings.
The appeal of short-term suspension,
I think that's it, but I can't
on
remember.
page 21. I believe the sentence is, if the principal imposed a suspension or upholds a suspension, the principal's decision may be appealed in writing within 5 administrative days to the superintendent's designee, which would be me, for a decision, which appeal shall be decided solely upon the record. Is that
I
what
believe
you're?
that's it. So basically, the student doesn't have the opportunity to bring forward information that may have surfaced later.
Whenever an appeal comes, I, on the record does mean that I gather all of the information
Okay.
from the student. So if the student, and even in the appeal letter, that the appeal letter has whatever the student wants to have considered for that appeal. So it's on the record. I am not personally interviewing different students, but the administrators are giving me witness statements. They're giving me anything that would, videos, I'll go to the school with the videos. So even though it's on the record, it is encompassing of all information that I could possibly attend to. But I don't go and re-interview students.
So if the principal made a recommendation based on what he knew at the time, but the student, something else comes forward after that, are you examining that information as well?
I am examining that information because that appeal is I look at the appeal as the record. So I look at that as well.
Okay.
And if there are things that rise to my attention that I need to further investigate and get witness statements, I will ask the principal to further develop it, increase that record so that I would know I need a witness statement from this person. I don't do that, the principal would do that and give that to me. And that typically is in writing from the student and signed by the student unless the student needs help with writing that statement. And that's what it's.
Is that the same as, or is your question, well, I guess it's different. So if a principal makes a recommendation,
Or upholds the suspension?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, is that a joint decision between you and the principal? Or is that once it leaves the school and comes to central office, it becomes a separate decision?
It becomes a superintendent's designee's decision, looking at the record, looking at the appeal, looking at everything in terms of what I have.
Okay, so one of the things we might want to look at, and this is, again, I sometimes mention the word historical. Historically, central office has aligned really well with our principals. And if we don't agree and align well with what the discipline should be, then we really ought to know why we're disagreeing. I mean, if we really are talking about collaborative decision-making, then the principal should have some voice in what the punishment should be, because they know the kid far better than somebody. I mean, you don't know the kid, you only know what you've accumulated through records. People who know the kid should participate or have some say in the decision making. I mean, I feel like that, I was trying to get a handle on what we've gotten away from. We are no longer partnering with the, feels like we're no longer partnering with the schools. Is that where you're coming from, or am I, is that a different?
That's different, but that is true also.
So, but it doesn't really have anything to do with this plan per se, does it?
Right.
It's more the implementation of the process.
Yeah.
So can we agree, everybody agrees to this plan that we are going to discuss the implementation? Because I think the implementation issue, and that is, frankly, some teachers comply with the handbook and have expectations of kids, and then other teachers don't. And if you walk down the hall, you can see the difference just in the self-learn policy. I don't even know how kids could even learn in some of the courses. So the question would be, we're saying we want continuity in implementation of the regulations. That's something you said was gonna be worked on, right, with staff. an understanding that they've got to all agree. And then the second part is implementation when a child has had a serious infraction. And what to do about that. Is that right?
Yes.
Anybody? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think I think the key is what Dr. Bishop said, is that it's just a matter of having that continuity where everybody's on the same page. And if we can get the teacher, the administrators on the same page, then when it gets to the point of central office, you feel like that you have all the information you need. But if you do not, and there's a question, then then the student should always have the option of defending themselves further to say, that's not what I said. This is what I said, and put it in writing, because we know historically that if it goes from the teacher to the principal to you, something, and then unfortunately, if it comes to us, there's a good possibility something got lost in translation from the first situation.
I thought we also talked about the fact that we were gonna look at the King William program again.
Okay, we are still part of the King William class.
Oh, did we use them last year?
We did not, but we talked about the menu, to consistency and implementation. So what's short-term suspension, what's the role of RISE, what's the role of King William, what's the role of all the different programs.
That's where I feel like we need to have a separate discussion.
Yeah, we can do that.
Is that,
Right, we did have students, on long-term suspension at RISE, or on virtual long-term suspension last year.
What's all bound, so all of those different options for kids.
and what's the success of them? I mean, if we've got reoccurring problems with kids who've received certain kinds of services, then maybe those services didn't do what they were intended to do.
And we also talked about reentry earlier on in the year with those programs. If you're not successful in those programs, but then you go right back to the high school, what's your success rate going to be? So that's,
Okay,
we come back to that as a separate session.
okay, all right, gotcha, thank you. If there are no other questions about that, then we are going to go to policy JN, student fees, fines, and charges.
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair, board members. This is the second reading of the update for the student fees for next year. If you'll remember the last meeting, the only change was adding the athletic passes for our sports program. And Ms. Swinford had a question about the Trojan Club and how that shifted in any way. And I believe the intent is to bring Chris and or John to the next work session or board meeting to have a discussion on what that may look like. My recommendation right now would be to approve it with the change that we have, knowing that we are confident and that's what the high school is now offering, and then getting a better understanding of what that program possibly looks like, what the future of that program may be. I know Mr. Stack has really been wanting a scoring table to offer some different things to fund some more advertising and things of that nature. So maybe that's something that he could present to you all kind of with his big picture of that program.
Questions?
I do have a question that this reminds me of, and that is robotics. And I think we got sidetracked with things like pandemics and whatnot, and this may not be the place to ask about that, but just want to make sure we keep an eye on robotics.
And whether or not there would be fees or a parental fee, there's different clubs and things that we have that it may depend. So certainly that's something that we're looking into having, and then whether or not that's a fee and what that looks like, certainly we can bring that back to you.
We also talked about stipends for some staff to
Right.
do the robotic.
Yeah.
So on both sides, but.
I noticed there was a post today at George Watkins about how many library books that are out.
Yeah.
So how do you even begin to do that? When you talk about collecting fees and, I mean, do we just,
I know from personal experience as a parent, you'll get a letter. If you have not returned your school book and maybe depending on what the book is, you know, you have the option of returning that book. There might be a fee involved with that book. I know at the high school level, the librarian tracks that, and actually we put that into our back to school fees at the beginning of the year as like a pass-through fee, basically, for certain types of books that were not returned. We don't do that in elementary school just because there's not really but one fee that you pay, so it's more of a note home to a parent, is my understanding as a parent in elementary school.
so how are we gonna get all those books back? Without charging, I mean, during this whole pandemic, I
They
mean,
said, was it over 500?
yeah, it was like 500 or 600 books that they're out.
Well, they've been running the library on Mondays for kids to continue to check out.
Yeah, so I mean,
It seemed like a lot.
And we encourage students to take them on March 13th, to take books home, so they may have not returned them, so we're hoping that we'll return them.
yeah.
So they'll make a push to,
Right.
that's part of,
I mean, because when we talk about the cost, I mean, you know, just say if the average book is $12 or more, depending on
You
the
want
book.
those books back at the beginning of the school year.
500 books is a lot of books.
Yeah, you know, so we
I
got,
would think they would do kind of like GW and push to have those books returned over the summer and possibly have bins out, you know, the schools are open.
they do have a bin out for drop off, but we could follow
Maybe we
that.
could add a bin at our meal pickup on Mondays for that.
They're gonna be doing a 5th grade at George Watkins, so
Okay.
they're gonna be pushing it there.
yeah, to do it there. Yeah, it was just interesting when I saw that number, I'm like, that's a lot of money.
Well, that may be something we can consider is doing a drop off as the grab and go.
Mhm.
I mean, the barcode, we know where they can go, we can store it at George Watkins, we can, you know, it would encourage more people to come to grab and go and then we get some books.
Yeah, that's a good.
Textbooks as well.
Yeah, we
Oh, yeah.
we were collecting textbooks all day today with kids just dropping,
Really?
just starting to drop them off. And then seniors with Chromebooks, we drop them off.
And it works both ways. There's also student supplies that are still in the cafeteria that they're asking parents to come pick up before a certain date.
Oh, yeah, so they can dispose of them if they don't. Yeah, good point. Okay, thank you.
There are no more questions, we'll move along to the federal programs application.
Yeah, this is the second read. I didn't receive any questions or anything, but I'm happy to answer them if you have any. If not, then they're up for approval tonight.
Any questions? Just want to say that thank you for filling those applications out.
I hope you all enjoy grading them.
It's a lot of fun. Okay,
School nutrition.
D.
did I miss one? I
Yes.
did, sorry. This,
This
okay,
is-
go ahead.
This
We're
is
gonna
a
take this one as well.
Okay, this is just a second reading as well, the meal rates that Ms. Smith presented at the last meeting. No change, no changes with her recommendation. I did just want to update y'all real briefly. Dr. Bishop did a call for us this week to try to get more families coming out on Mondays for meals, and it worked. We had 320 plus students today. Last week prior, we had only 201, which was low for what we had been doing. So we're, again, trying to push that message, encourage families that we are still serving meals on Mondays. We did get the waiver for the summer feeding program, so we're gonna continue to do that every Monday in the summer. So we'll be pushing more information out, but just certainly, as you all are on the community, please pass that on to folks.
Thank you, sorry I missed that. Any other questions? I wanted to jump quickly to action items too quickly, right? The first action item is actually going to be a motion to approve the superintendent's recommendations for personnel actions, with the exception of the annual stipends, which will be brought back at the next scheduled board meeting. So do I hear a motion?
A motion to approve the superintendent's recommendations as presented,
With the exception.
with the exception, thank you.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? The next item for consideration, is the, selection of VSBA delegate and alternate delegate. And we discussed this earlier and indicated that Ms. Swinford would be the, delegate and that, Ms. Gaskell would be the alternate. Do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion, we accept, Ms. Swinford and Ms. Saskell as our representative to the SBA for the upcoming year.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
No opposed? Congratulations on
Thanks.
on that very illustrious.
Another successful year.
There you go.
Way to go virtual.
It's be different, it will be different, so. Do I hear a motion to approve the recommended, 2021 school board meeting dates as presented?
I move we approve the 2021 school board meeting dates as presented.
And do I hear a second?
I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, motion carries. Do I hear a motion to approve the, 2021 student handbook code of conduct as presented?
I move we approve this 2021 student handbook code of conduct as presented.
Thank you. This is helpful. Yeah.
I second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Do I hear a motion to approve the 2021 student fees, fines, and charges as presented?
Make a motion, we accept the student fees and fines as presented.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any motion carries. Do I hear a motion to approve the 2021 school nutrition meal rates as presented?
I move we approve the school nutrition meal rates as presented.
Do I hear a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, no, none opposed. The last item, do I hear a motion to approve the federal programs and applications as presented?
I move that we approve the federal funds applications as presented.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Any other items for this work session?
Not for the open session.
Really, I really appreciate the open dialogue when we went over the return to learn. I really
Good discussion.
felt that it was a nice discussion, so thank you for that. At this point, we are going to, take a, it's not actually a recess. We are actually going to go into closed session, so I need to hear a motion to go into closed session.
I move we go into closed session.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. Everyone is free.